Okay, we're with John Jeckovich, World War II veteran, and we're on chapter 4 of his book, Passes to Owensboro. This is when he's staying at Camp Breckenridge in Indiana, and he'd luckily get a pass for a weekend for Friday, Saturday, and be back early Sunday or sometimes Monday morning. So now he's with his friend Smith, who's in the service, Smith's girlfriend Betsy, and they brought along a lady named Elaine that Mr. Jeckovich was taking to dinner and hanging out with. So we're going to pick it up right about then. Smith and I decided when the Betsy and Elaine had gone to the powder room, we would get some pizza and something to drink on our way back to the motel. We would listen to the radio and relax before going back to camp. Everyone agreed, and Betsy stated she would decide what she was doing relative to going home. As we sat in the motel room, listening to the music of Glenn Miller from the ETO and eating pizzas, Smith and Betsy decided to go in the bedroom. I suspected they would. I felt a sense of uneasiness of their actions, and I believe Elaine sensed it also, but neither of us commented regarding it. While we talked and embraced, I could not resist the temptation. She remarked quietly that I was moving too fast. I embraced her and kissed her passionately. Elaine remarked several times that she would stop, but I either did not hear it or ignored it. At the moment, I sat up one elbow and remarked that I should put. After a while, I returned kissing her. In a few moments, it was over, and as we held one another. After some time, I came to the realization that we had to be back to camp. It was 24-30 hours, and the last bus for camp leaves at 1:30. I told Elaine that we had to leave for camp. She understood and said that I had better inform Smith. I repeatedly knocked on the bedroom door, and there was no response. I opened the door quietly, and Smith and Betsy were sound asleep in each other's arms. I gently nudged Smith several times, and after a time he woke up with a start. I advised him we had to get back to camp and that we had missed our last bus, and if we did not hurry. They both jumped up and said they'd be out shortly. In the meantime, Elaine came to the bathroom where she freshened up, and I informed her we'd be in the bathroom for a few minutes and asked her to hurry Smith and Betsy along. As Smith drove to the bus station, everyone was quiet and thoughtful. Elaine had her head on my shoulder, and Betsy was sitting close to Smith. I kissed Elaine several times until I think of her and asked her to think of me. She said she would. She smiled and said would look forward to it. They both waved at the bus station. I could see Elaine was crying, and as she saw us disappear into the night. Riding back to camp, Smith informed me that Betsy had decided she should go home with Elaine, and the next day he would try to see her on a 3-day pass or possibly a 15-day furlough before we shipped out. What that meant to me was that it was a strong possibility that I would not see Elaine again. I was both saddened and disappointed. When we arrived back at camp at 3:30 hours, Reveille was at 500 hours. Just enough time for a shower and a little snack before it was time to get up. The last 3 days were a great boost to my morale and my self-esteem. I had done things which I thought were beyond my realm of expectations. I enjoyed myself tremendously and wished it had not ended so quickly. I knew I would not see Elaine again, and I accepted that. Although with some regret and vexation, I was fortunate to have Elaine come to my life, if only for a brief period, and I would reminisce about our short journey together in the days and weeks to come. They would help to fortify and strengthen me and the unknown months ahead. There was talk of the upcoming furloughs in the distant future, which meant only one thing. We were getting close to shipping out. The training intensified even more, and it went from squad to platoon, level to company, battalion range. We were seeing more and more of the top brass, Major General Fay B. Prickett, Major General Ray E. Porter,
Porter, yeah.
How was Porter? How was Major General Ray Porter?
What?
How was Major General Ray Porter? Was he a good soldier?
Well, I didn't see him. He's in the administration. He's back 5 miles.
Would be in our midst
He's
of,
not a combat soldier, no.
would be in the midst of our training and even asking questions of some of the enlisted men. One rainy Sunday that afternoon, the entire battalion was out on the live artillery range. This was in a close coordination with the rest of the battalion on a frontal assault problem, the artillery firing live rounds. Sergeant Baker was panic-stricken as there was a great deal of brass about, and he would become non-performing when he had to give orders on how to deploy his squad in an assault of this magnitude. As I observed his incompetence, I wondered what it'd be actually like to be a combat fighter. The other members of his squad felt the same way, and it ultimately came down to Fink to make the decision in which to place the gun, made the decision in where to place the gun. We all knew that later that back at camp, Baker would talk as if he had the entire situation under control. Fink would say nothing, as our inclination also. The exercise lasted until dark, and we were wet, cold, and hungry. We could not wait until we got an order to march back to camp. It was an hour's march back to the company area when we were told that chow would be available shortly. After a shower and some dry clothes, we looked a little brighter. I could not help thinking of what it'd be like in an actual combat with no hot showers, dry clothes, or a hot meal to look forward to. As usual, Sergeant Meadows had a hot meal all prepared for us at the mess hall. Okay, how you ladies doing?
Hello, we saw a wonderful movie.
Oh, did you like it?
It was the second time and much better.
Did you stay awake?
Yeah.
That's good. How are you feeling today, Harriet?
Oh, a lot better.
You look well.
Thank you.
You
I
look-
try, you know that.
All right, good night, Harriet.
Good night, guys.
Okay.
Good night. Safely.
Good night, honey.
Good night, Jen.
Good night.
It was a time that the most of us learned of the accident in the area several miles west of our position. It seemed as though a soldier from the G Company had become confused in all the noise and troop movement and wandered into a live danger area where he was caught in an artillery barrage. At first, the early medical reports he was in serious and multiple injuries due to shrapnel, but not life-threatening. We later learned he died and never regaining consciousness. Do you remember when that soldier was wandering into the...
Yeah, the maneuver, they got lost.
And that was the end
Then
of
he
it,
got
right?
panicky when they started shooting. That was live ammunition.
That was the end of him, right?
Yeah.
We were not affording much free time and pretty much restricted to the company. I would occasionally go over to the other barracks and see Lane and Larson were up to. They were also griping about their exhaustive days, and were putting in, wondering what the rest of us, when the Army was going to let up on us. Larson showed me the latest picture of his wife and children, and I thought that must have been extremely painful to be away from your immediate family and then not see them for months on end. I know I missed my mother and sister, but I imagine that was a little different from being married to someone and having several small children you did not see for long periods of time, I was relieved I did not have this problem. Lane was a great deal more introverted than Larson. We, both Larson and I, were of the opinion that he was having a difficult time adjusting to the Army life, and in particular the wicked, accelerated pace they were going through in our training. Whenever Lane would put in his personal guard down and relax a little, we both would listen to him intently to what he had to say. He missed his family intensely and would, on a rare occasion, take out a picture from his wallet and show it to us. He also talked about his life at home, his job, his parents, and who we lived close by. They would go on all kinds of picnics to the lake on weekends, go tobogganing and sledding. He was missed the changing of the seasons and thought the South was one big boring season all year round. Is that what you thought of the South?
The what?
Did you think the South was one big boring season all year round because you missed the 4 seasons up north?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was better to have 4 seasons.
Yeah. We'd always usually wind up at the PX and listen to loud country music and jukebox over a beer and a Coke. I liked these little friendly chats, and although I did not talk much about myself, contrary to Lane and Larson, they never seemed to notice. We were scheduled for a 25-mile hike right after breakfast that next morning. Hold on a second. Stand by. It was the middle of June, and it'd be quite warm toward the middle of the day, and everyone commenced to sweat profusely. Uppermost in everyone's mind was the provision that no one wanted to fall on the hike due to fatigue or heat exhaustion. I have never fallen out, but I had seen some of the men who had. They were completely exhausted on several instances and transported back to the base hospital by ambulance that accompanied it. Captain Goodnight and most of the other officers usually made the hikes with us, with a possible exception of Lieutenant Cummings. Usually on our 10-minute break, we are occurred every hour. Captain Goodnight and some of the other officers would go up and down the column, checking for sore feet, so what, a lot of the guys in these 25-mile hikes, they got exhausted. PFC Romano, the platoon medic, was busy patching blistered feet and giving out salt tablets to prevent heat exhaustion. I did not suffer much from blistered feet, either because I would sprinkle my feet and my boots with foot powder, or I just had toughened feet. I noticed that Lane was having a difficult time making the hike. It was not his feet, but the heat and the walking. We're at a fairly rapid pace of 120 steps per minute, 50 minutes out of every hour. That's a pretty rapid pace.
Yeah.
120 steps per minute.
And no water.
That's rapid. That's a rapid pace. The only nourishment we had were the rations we carried in our light packs. 2 packages of K rations and water from our canteen. I always managed to carry several candy bars, but they melted in the heat and the searing sun. The hike would take about 6 to 8 hours, depending on the terrain and weather. Walking in the rain had a tendency to slow your pace, as you quickly started to slosh around in the mud and the water. About 6 miles into the hike, Lane fell out and had to be transported back to the dispensary by ambulance. Larson informed me on the next break that it was acute heat exhaustion, but I thought it was something more serious. He told me that Lane was not feeling well and was going to go to sick call the following day. As we continued to trudge into the halfway mark, Sergeant Baker passed us riding in a Jeep. I turned to Feek and asked him if I had seen Baker go by. He nodded and shrugged his shoulders. On our next break, Baker pulled up alongside of us and told us that Fink is now in charge of the squad. He was going back to camp as he sprained his ankle and could not walk. We thought that was a crock, and we felt even more disgusted with Baker. So Sergeant Baker said he sprained his ankle, and he's going to have a Jeep take him back to the barracks.
Yeah.
And you thought that was a crock, right?
Yeah. Now who's this?
I don't know. After a halfway marker, we took a 20-minute break, patched our sore feet, those who needed it, and started our journey back to camp. It seemed to go more smoothly now than we had gotten the pace and the rhythm. I was completely drenched, and the straps from my pack were biting harder and harder to get up each break. Captain Goodnight would come by every other break, and our last break he gave out candy bars, and he had carried in the ambulance to keep from melting. I did not see him on the other officers' ride in a Jeep or ambulance the entire hike. There was only one I thought had goofed off, and that was Sergeant Baker, and I'm sure he would have a good explanation for it.
12 minutes.
We reached the Three Forks mark, and strangely enough, the dropouts decreased measurably. I imagine it was due to the fact that we got our second wind, and the weaker ones among us were winnowed out. Besides, it got cooler and the rain had stopped. I did not mind the hikes. I think I'd rather enjoy them. While walking, I would think of home, at what little I had left behind compared to some of the other people here. I also wondered if I was ever be in a position to have a wife and family, someone to care for and to be cared for in return. I thought of Elaine and the experience we shared together that night in Evansville. It was a spontaneous outburst of emotion, and I was not ashamed of it. My only regret in the episode that would not take place under more desirable circumstances without the presence of Smith and Betsy. As dusk approached, we reached the main gate and marched directly to the company area. At that point, while we were in still formation, Captain Goodnight spoke to us about the outstanding job we had done on the hike, and that he was impressed with our accomplishments all through our training period. He also stated that he had attained our goal in our training objective, and we're on our way to becoming first-rate infantrymen and soldiers. Again, he praised and said hot chow was available as soon as we had showered and changed clothes. He then dismissed us. It sounded like the textbook type pep talk, and none of us took him very seriously. We later found out that Lane had been taken to the base hospital for further evaluation and testing. As the case with all hikes of this nature, we're giving the next half day off with no reveille call, and the first formation for the day would be at 1300 hours. We all separate the next morning. I used extra time to catch up on my letter writing and do a little house cleaning on my personal belongings and straighten up my foot locker. I would have liked to written a letter to Elaine, but since I did not have her address, I did not know what to ask. I did not want to ask Smith for him. I put it out of my mind, and I knew something I was making too much of a short acquaintance. After it was a juvenile of me to act this way, but I could not put the entire issue aside. I later realized it was my inexperience in the matters such as these had given me so much concern as it resolved to a better the next time opportunity presented itself. It seemed as though our last 25-mile hike had really been the turning point of our training program. We could sense that the rapid pace we all had endured for the past several months had suddenly throttled down to a more moderate gait. The schedule was not as hectic nor as demanding. It seemed as though we were marking time and reminded me of Upton. Our revised schedule evolved to a routine. Reveille to retreat ritual, passes were dealt out. I had not been out of camp on pass since the first time with Smith, Elaine, and Betsy in Evansville. Smith approached me after the new schedule was in effect and asked if I wanted to go on a 3-day pass to him to South Carolina to see Betsy and Elaine.
8 minutes.
I agreed, but I told him I do not think we could have managed 3-day pass at this time. He said he would try to let me know and how we made out. As it worked out, Smith cajoled a 3-day pass out of Captain Goodnight and Sergeant Whaling under the pretext that his fiancée was going to have his baby next weekend. It was imperative he be there with her. He felt bad that he could not include me in his deception, but I understood and said, sure to say hello to Elaine for me and tell her that I miss her. I would have liked to have seen Elaine once again, but under the different circumstances other than with Smith and Betsy. It was that very same weekend that Smith left for South Carolina that Larson and I went to see Lane at the base hospital. Lane looked much older and worn out, and to our amazements, they found out he suffered a mild heart attack shortly after he reached the hospital from the hike. It was fortunate he was taken off the hike and transported to the infirmary and later to the hospital. He also told us he's being transferred to Brooke Medical Center at Fort Sam Houston the next day. Then he asked if we would ship his personal belongings from his footlocker at the camp back home. Larson said that he would soon as he got back to the camp. We said our goodbyes to Lane, knowing full well we would never see him again, and by all accounts, we would get a medical discharge from the service within a month's time. Although it was unfortunate with his heart condition, I was glad for him getting out of the service and all the uncertainty entailed. Hello. Have a nice evening.
6 minutes.
The next few days were with lectures, movies, and compass problems out in the field, but nothing of the nature we're accustomed to in the previous months. I managed to pull guard duty during the middle of the week, and that helped me break up the routine of the barracks life. Guard duty was for a 24-hour period and gave me the next day off from active duty. This took the week to Friday, and I began to plan something for the upcoming weekend, like a weekend pass. Since I had just had guard duty, I should be relatively free in any duty coming this weekend. I decided to go to Owensboro, a fairly large town, within the limits of a weekend pass. I asked Larson to accompany me, and he agreed, but that Friday night, when the weekend duty roster was posted, he discovered he was on guard duty Saturday. That did not deter me, and I decided to go myself, which I really preferred anyway. Because everyone went to Evansville, it'd be a good change of atmosphere. I tried to find some information regarding the town of Red Cross Center camp, but they were not too helpful. I also asked around the barracks, and my only reply was, I received that Owensboro was a dead town, with nothing at GIs for, and no large USO, no gambling places, no red light districts. It sounded like my kind of town, and I look forward to going there. My only hurdle, how do I overcome the Saturday morning inspection parade? That was on my way. I achieved all the goals in approximately 1,300 hours Saturday. I was on my way to Owensboro. I was a little apprehensive as I've never done anything quite like this before. Going out on my own without a formal plan, not knowing the circumstances that I would encounter, nor the wherewithal of resources that I would need. I was determined to see it through, and I would be better for it. I did not tell Larson I was going to Owensboro for the simple reason I did not think I needed his guidance and assessment of the situation. Besides, I was not going to become dependent on anyone for advice or counseling. I was mature and I gave myself credit for that. My whole life had been predicated on the supposition that I came last in the hierarchy of events, and that was just the way it was. I found it differently, and much to my delight, and met with my complete approval. I would not be self-centered as my brothers, but I would not sell myself short for good of some great, mysterious, all-consuming entity. I felt a new and inspiring exhilaration of my newfound being. My only hope was that I'd be able to sustain it when I returned home. I did not want to revert to the sullenness, drab existence that was my life before. I had tasted the cup of fulfillment, and now it developed in the yearning for more of the same. The buses for Evansville and Owensboro left at the PX. They usually started to leave around noon on Saturday and 1600 on weekdays. As the same bus serviced both towns, it was crowded with boisterous GIs getting their adrenaline pumping for the time of the town. I did not know anyone on the bus, and I was especially early getting the first bus out of camp. Minutes.
2.
After stopping at Henderson, which was a transfer point for the trip to Owensboro, I boarded a smaller bus for the remainder of the trip.
You bought a what?
After stopping at Henderson, which was a transfer point for the trip to Owensboro, I boarded a smaller bus for the remainder of the trip. Were the buses free to the GIs?
Yeah.
Okay. There were only several soldiers beside myself on the bus, but I inquired of them about accommodations for soldiers at Owensboro. They were not helpful, with the exception of one sergeant suggested I try some of the local churches, which I was going to do anyway. Owensboro was situated on the banks of the Ohio River and was the largest city in western Kentucky, with a population of about 50,000 people. It was mostly an agricultural town with a sprinkling of major industries such as electronics and electric motor manufacturing. Among it was more traditional occupations were several whiskey distilleries and tobacco processing plants.
Dave, I gotta go pee.
Okay,
Put somebody on standby.
okay.
Yeah, I was